68-year-old mountain woman bought a ruined cabin until her dog started barking at the basement door. The truck engine died with a tired cough, leaving only the mountain wind and the faint creak of old timber somewhere in the dark. Thea Morrison sat still for a moment, both hands on the steering wheel, feeling the kind of silence that presses against your ribs. 68 years old, a widow for 3, she had promised herself she would stop running from grief. Yet here she was, choosing a broken cabin at the edge of Montana like she was stepping into exile. Max, her German Shepherd mix, shifted in the passenger seat. His ears were tense, body leaned forward. He wasn't afraid. He was alert, like a seasoned rescuer stepping back into a world that once scarred him. The cabin stood under the pines like something trying to disappear. Roof sagging. Porch swallowed by snow. Windows fogged with years of dust. It looked less like a home and more like a memory someone tried to bury. Thea opened the door. The cold hit her face, sharp enough to sting. Max leapt down first, landing with almost silent paws. He sniffed the air, tail stiff, eyes locked on the cabin. "It's just wind," she whispered, though she didn't quite believe it. Inside, the air smelled of damp wood and old metal. Her boots left tracks in a thin coat of dust. The cabin had been empty for a long time. She knew that from the listing, but the silence felt too deliberate, as if someone had closed the door and whispered, "Don't follow." She turned on her lantern. The weak circle of light swept across the room. A collapsed bookshelf, a wood stove leaning to one side, a single photograph frame on the floor without the photo inside. Small things. Harmless things. Still, her heartbeat quickened. Max paced the room twice, then stopped. He stood in front of a short hallway she hadn't noticed during the daytime. At the end of it, half hidden behind a toppled coat rack, was a wooden door. Reinforced, scratched, sealed shut with nails hammered in all directions, like someone closed it in a hurry. She approached slowly. The floor groaned. Max let out a low rumble that vibrated in her knees. His fur bristled along his spine. "It's just the old basement," she whispered, but her voice carried doubt. Max's growl deepened, not fearful, warning. She knelt and touched the wood. It was colder than the rest of the cabin, as if the air behind it belonged to November, even in midsummer. She pressed her ear to it, expecting silence. Instead, something answered. A faint sound, soft, uneven. A knock, or the leftover echo of one. It was so quiet she might have doubted it, if Max hadn't exploded into a sharp bark at the exact same moment. She stumbled back. Max planted himself between her and the door, teeth bared, hackles raised like a soldier remembering a battle he never wanted to fight again. He wasn't barking randomly. He wasn't confused. He was focused on that door as if he knew exactly what lay behind it. Thea grabbed his collar gently. "Max, hey, it's okay." But Max didn't hear her. He let out another bark, louder, angrier, and the echoes bounced down the stairwell beneath the floorboards. The cabin seemed to inhale after each sound, like the whole structure was bracing for something. Then came the second noise. Not a knock this time. A shift. Wood rubbing against wood. Something brushing across the other side of the door. She felt the movement through the floor, up her legs, into her chest. Max lunged once, claws scraping against the boards, barking with the fury of a dog who had found danger and refused to let it stay hidden. Thea's breath came fast. Fear, sharp and cold, pricked at the back of her neck. But beneath it was something else. A familiarity. A pull she couldn't explain. As if she wasn't stepping into a stranger's cabin, but into a story that had been waiting for her. The wind outside rose, rattling the shutters. Snowflakes drifted past the cracked window. The storm was small, but the mountains always made small storms feel personal. She forced herself to stand straight. Whoever lived here, she murmured. They left something behind. Max turned to look at her, eyes bright, pupils wide, chest heaving. He wasn't trying to scare her, he was trying to protect her. Then, unexpectedly, Max stopped barking. His ears stayed pinned forward. His body stayed tense, but something in his posture shifted, curiosity replacing fury. Thea stepped beside him. From behind the sealed basement door, something tapped again. Once, then twice, then silence that wasn't empty at all. Her throat tightened. Max. The dog let out a soft, trembling whine. Not fear, recognition. Something under this cabin had been waiting a long time, and Max was the first to hear it calling. Morning came slow in the mountains, slipping through the broken window like a hesitant visitor. Thea barely slept. Every time she drifted off, she woke to the echo of that faint knock under the floor. Max slept lightly too, his head resting on his paws, ears twitching at every groan of the cabin. By sunrise, Thea knew she needed to see the house more clearly. Fear always grew in the dark. Maybe daylight would prove she had let her imagination run wild. Max stayed close as she moved through the cabin. He wasn't anxious the way some older dogs could be. He was methodical, trained, purposeful. He sniffed the baseboards first, then the corners, then circled the basement door like a detective returning to a crime scene. Thea crouched near a crack in the floor. At first glance it looked old, like the rest of the cabin. But when she touched it, the splintered edges were sharp, clean, fresh, as if something had pushed upward during the night. She swallowed. The boards were bowed just slightly, like something beneath them had shifted in a slow, powerful way. Max's nails clicked softly as he moved toward her. He sniffed the crack, ears lifting, tail low. Then he pushed his nose harder, inhaling deep. Recognition passed through his posture. Thea saw it clearly this time. Max wasn't reacting to danger alone. He was remembering something. "You smell something?" she whispered. Max pressed one paw against the floorboard. His muscles tensed, ready, waiting. She continued inspecting the room. Near the wood stove, she noticed a small object caught under a floor plank. She dug it out with her fingers. A button, metal, cold despite the heat of her skin. And old, very old, maybe from a coat or uniform. She rubbed it clean on her sweater. It carried a faint smell of smoke and something metallic. Iron, rust, or blood long dried. Thea straightened slowly. The cabin wasn't just abandoned. Someone had lived here, fought here, maybe died here. A family. The realtor said, but the records were vague. Paperwork half missing, property history incomplete. A lifetime working in libraries had taught her one thing. When records disappear, something else has been buried with them. Max moved away from her suddenly and returned to the basement door. He lowered his body, nose pressed against the narrow seam at the bottom. His breathing sharpened, followed by a low growl that wasn't aggressive now. It was alert, investigative, the sound he used when tracking survivors during SAR operations years ago. Thea's chest tightened. "Max, what are you picking up?" He ignored her voice. His pupils dilated, shoulders stiff. Then he pawed at the boards again. Faster, anxious. She watched him struggle between instinct and restraint. Dogs carried trauma differently. They didn't speak about it, but Thea had learned to read the signs. Max had been found after a wildfire rescue gone wrong years before she adopted him. He rarely flinched at anything. But closed spaces, darkness, trapped air under floors, those stirred something in him. And now the cabin was stirring it too. Thea backed away from the door and took a deeper breath than she meant to. Fear crept up her spine again, thin as a thread but sharp. She needed fresh air. Outside, a cold wind brushed against her face. Lone Birch looked peaceful in the morning light. Smoke rose from chimneys at a distance. The mountains stood tall, the pines whispering with each gust. If anyone else were looking at this place, they'd think it was perfect. But Thea felt the weight beneath her feet, the secrets that clung to the cabin like frost. For a moment she wondered if she'd made a mistake leaving Seattle, leaving the comfort of people who knew her name. Grief was lonely, but this place was lonelier. Inside, Max barked, a single sharp sound. Thea rushed back in. Max stood stiff at the cracked floorboard. The crack had widened since she touched it earlier, barely visible unless you knew to look. But it was there. Something had shifted again. Then a new noise rose from below. Not a knock, a scrape, as if wood slid against stone. Slow, heavy, intentional. Max growled, tail straight back, every muscle drawn tight like wire. But he didn't lunge. He listened. He waited. Something in that sound triggered him differently from last night. He wasn't acting out of fear or aggression. He was responding like a trained dog who had found someone alive under rubble. The realization struck Thea in a cold wave. He thinks something down there needs help. She knelt beside him, trying to steady her breathing. Max, there's no one under there. This place has been empty for decades. But Max didn't break focus. He lowered his head until his cheek touched the floor. His breath fogged the wood as he exhaled. Another scrape answered him. Thea shot to her feet. A pulse pounded in her throat. This wasn't wind. It wasn't pipes. It wasn't the house settling. It was movement. She stumbled back a step, grabbing the table to steady herself. Questions rushed at her all at once. Was someone trapped? Had the previous owner left a squatter behind? Did animals burrow through old cellars in the mountains? Max turned to her, and for the first time since they arrived, she saw fear in his eyes. Not for himself. For her. The cabin groaned again. Something beneath them pushed faintly, just enough to tremble the dust. Thea's breath caught. Whatever lived in the dark under this house had been silent for years, and now it was waking up. Night dropped over Lone Birch with the kind of silence that only comes before a storm. By dusk, the wind had already picked up, pushing snow across the yard in restless spirals. Thea added more wood to the stove and pulled her cardigan close. The temperature always fell faster in the mountains, but tonight the cold felt personal, like it was searching for seams in her resolve. Max paced by the door, not anxious, anticipating. "You're restless," she murmured. "Storm's coming, that's all." But Max didn't look at the windows or the drifting snow outside. His eyes kept tracking the hallway, the basement door, the invisible heartbeat under the floor. Thea tried to read a book, but the words never settled. Every creak of the cabin made her flinch. The instinctive fear she'd felt the previous nights hadn't faded. It had grown roots. When the storm hit, the roof groaned and wind shoved against the cabin's walls hard enough to rattle the stovepipe. Snow slapped the windows like thrown sand. The cabin swayed as if acknowledging a threat. Max barked once, sharp, then ran to the back door. "Max, no, not now!" He barked again, louder, demanding. Before she could protest, he pawed the latch. The back door swung open with a blast of cold air and swirling snow. Max dashed out into the night. "Max!" Thea grabbed her coat and followed, boots sinking into snow, already up to her ankles. The storm roared around her. She shielded her eyes and spotted Max only because his fur caught the lantern light on the porch. He was digging furiously under the far end of the wooden overhang, sending snow and clumps of frozen dirt flying. "What are you doing?" Her voice was nearly swallowed by the wind. Max didn't look up. He dug harder, more desperate. He had tunneled himself almost completely under the porch by the time Thea reached him. She knelt beside him, brushing snow from his back. And then the metallic clang hit her ears. Max's paw struck something buried beneath the soil. He paused for half a second, then dug faster until the outline of a small box emerged from the mud and ice. A tin container. Dented, rust creeping up all sides. Max pulled it out with his teeth and backed up, shaking snow from his fur. Thea shivered, but not from the cold. "Where did you learn this, boy?" she whispered. She already knew the answer. SAR dogs didn't forget. Even when retired, the instinct to uncover what others couldn't see was woven into their bones. Something in this ground had called to him. She carried the tin box inside. Max followed close, tail stiff, ears high, pacing as she set the box on the table. "All right," she said softly. "Let's see what you found." The clasp broke off with almost no effort. The lid stuck for a moment, then gave way with a brittle crack. Inside the box were 3 items, simple but heavy in weight. The first was a photograph. Thea held it carefully. A young girl stood in front of the cabin, her hair in long braids, her smile warm but shy. Written on the back in fading ink was a name. Emma Ray, age 17. Thea stared at the handwriting. Her breath snagged. Ray. The name pulled at something distant in her memory. She'd seen it before. A loan ledger, a property record, a missing persons note buried in the county archives. She couldn't place it yet, but the familiarity was unsettling. She set the photo down and lifted the second item. A rough map, hand-drawn. Jagged lines marking the tree line, a creek running east, a narrow trail branching off the main path, leading deeper into the forest. The ink had bled from years of moisture, but one detail stood clear. Someone had circled a point far from the cabin. A hidden place. Thea leaned closer. The lines were erratic, like they'd been drawn quickly. Not with the care of planning, but with the urgency of warning. Max pressed his head against her shoulder. He understood tension before language. The third item was a slip of paper, so fragile she had to slide it carefully from the tin. The note was short. Just a single sentence written in shaky handwriting. "If anything happens, follow the creek." Thea's pulse hammered. She looked back at the photograph, at Emma's shy smile. A girl who had lived here long before the cabin turned to ruin. Her gaze drifted to the basement door. A family name, a hidden map, a warning note, a door someone had sealed with nails. Cold dread washed over her, the kind that made old grief stir in places she thought had already healed. She whispered the name aloud. Emma Ray. Max lifted his head at the sound. He looked at the basement door, then at the map, then back at her. It wasn't random. None of this was random. Ray. She finally remembered where she had seen it. 20 years ago, in a Seattle newspaper archive, researching a blacklisted author for a library display. There was a brief article about a Montana family who vanished in 1972. Political suspicion. Accusations. The family name was Ray. The case was never resolved. A family erased by fear. A cabin left behind like a grave marker. And now, a dog barking at a basement door no one had opened in half a century. The wind howled harder. Snow piled against the windows. The cabin flickered with shadows that made the walls look closer than they should be. Thea sat down, the map shaking in her hands. "Max," she said quietly, "I think someone tried to hide more than just a room." Max placed his paw on the table beside the tin, as if telling her the truth wasn't buried. Not really, not anymore. Lone Birch looked different under daylight. Quiet, practical, the kind of mountain town that held its stories tight. Thea parked her truck beside the general store and stepped out with Max at her heel. Snow had melted enough to reveal muddy patches of earth and the faint lines of old wagon trails. Everything here felt older than it should be, as if time lingered instead of moving. She tightened her scarf and headed toward the only place she knew would hold answers. The town library was small, barely 3 rooms, but she trusted libraries the way some people trusted churches. Books didn't lie. Records didn't flinch. Inside, the room was warmed by a wood stove. Shelves sagged with decades-old county documents. A woman behind the counter nodded politely. "Need help finding something?" "History on old properties," Thea said, "particularly cabins near the Sapphire Range." The librarian pointed toward a narrow aisle. "Cold War files, missing persons, property disputes. It's a mess, but it's what we've got." She thanked her and began sorting through yellowed newspapers, tax rolls, and handwritten ledgers. After 15 minutes, her fingers froze on a headline so faint she had to tilt it towards the light. "Ray family under suspicion during state security inquiry." The article was short. Too short. A family of 3. Father Caleb, Mother Irene, daughter Emma, taken in for questioning in 1972. No charges filed, no follow-up article. Then the record simply stopped. Not cleared. Not condemned. Just erased. Thea stared at the page as if it could answer the one question that stuck in her mind since Max found the tin box. Why hide a map? Why leave a warning? The door to the library opened behind her. A gust of cold followed an older man with a beard more silver than white. He nodded to the librarian, then paused when he saw Thea. His eyes, the color of steel scraped raw, lingered on the file she was reading. "You're at the wrong shelf if you want light reading," he said. "I'm looking for information on the Ray family." His jaw tightened. "Some truths are buried for a reason." "Maybe. But someone left clues under my cabin." That caught him. He approached slowly. Max stepped forward, positioning his body between Thea and the stranger. Not aggressive, but protective, chest lifted slightly. The man lifted a hand. "Good dog. Smart eyes." "He doesn't usually step in unless he senses something," Thea said. The man chuckled softly. "Then he's got a better radar than most of Lone Birch." He stuck out his hand. "Samuel Griggs. Hunt these mountains since before you were born." "And you knew the Rays?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted to the window, where snowflakes started falling again. "There are things the mountain keeps," he said quietly, "and some things it never should have taken. The Ray family was one of those." Thea waited. Samuel's voice dropped. "People said they were traitors, but people say a lot when fear walks through a town. Snow covers tracks, but it doesn't erase what was done." "What happened to them?" Samuel shook his head. "No one talks about it. No one wants to. 50 years of silence tends to make a story heavier, not lighter." A flash of something passed through his eyes, something close to guilt. "What do you know?" she pressed. He hesitated, then nodded toward Max. "Ask your dog. Seems like he already found the first thread." Before she could speak again, Samuel walked out. No goodbye. No look back. Thea exhaled shakily. It felt like every answer pushed her toward more questions. She gathered copies of the newspaper articles and property records, tucking them into her coat. When she stepped outside, Max was already leading the way, nose to the air, tail straight, body posture alert. "You want to follow the map, don't you?" she said. Max didn't answer, but he did something better. He picked up speed. They headed toward the creek, marked in the old hand-drawn map. Meltwater trickled between rocks, the sound sharp in the otherwise quiet forest. The creek wound behind the cabin into thicker pines. Max sniffed as he went, occasionally glancing back to make sure she kept up. After a few minutes, she noticed the subtle shift in the terrain. The ground dipped, the air thickened, and the scent of wet moss grew stronger. Max paused at a cluster of shrubs and started pawing at the earth beneath them. What is it? He pushed deeper, nudging branches aside until something hard knocked against the ground. A hump of earth, perfectly rectangular, overgrown, intentional, barely visible under decades of leaves and roots. Thea crouched and brushed away the debris. Beneath layers of dirt and grass was a slab of old wood. Not natural, not fallen, placed. Max barked once, sharp and sure. She felt her heartbeat thump in her chest. The wooden slab had hinges, a hidden door, the kind used for storm shelters or hiding places or things people wanted lost. She pressed her hand against it. The wood gave slightly. Not rotten, preserved by the cold. Max, she whispered, I think this used to lead somewhere. A memory flickered then, her mother telling her that secrets were like roots. They grow in the dark, but they change the shape of everything above them. Thea looked at the hidden entrance, the creek, the map, Emma Ray's face. Everything was aligning in a way she could no longer ignore. She stood, wiping dirt from her palms. This wasn't just a family, and this wasn't just a cabin. Max's ears perked, catching something she couldn't hear. He stared toward the mountains with a stillness that unnerved her. Not fear, recognition. And if Max recognized something from his past life, something about rescue, survival, or danger, then whatever the Ray family left behind wasn't just history. It was alive in the land, waiting. And Thea had just found the door that would open it. The wooden hatch groaned when Thea pulled it open, as if the forest itself protested. Cold air rose from the darkness below, carrying the scent of earth long undisturbed. Max stood at the edge, paws planted, his body angled in that precise, deliberate stance he used when fear and duty met in the center of his chest. It's all right, Thea whispered, though she wasn't sure if she meant it for him or herself. The ladder was old but stable. She climbed down carefully, boots touching soil that felt colder than the rest of the forest. Max followed, leaping the last few steps, landing softly despite his size. The space was larger than she expected, a hidden cellar carved into the mountain's belly. Wooden beams arched above them like ribs. Shelves lined the walls, collapsed in places, leaving piles of decayed tools and rusted cans. Max moved first. His nose pressed to the dirt, tail stiff, body following something invisible threading through the air. He paused at a corner where the wall narrowed, sniffed once, then again. Harder. Then he froze. His ears lowered, his muscles locked. A low rumble rose from deep in his chest. What is it? Thea asked, voice barely above a breath. Max stepped aside. Thea lifted her flashlight. The beam swept across the rough wall, catching something dark. Something uneven, something smeared. Old blood. So faded it blended with the grain, but unmistakable. Dried, cracked. From decades ago. A coldness scraped down her spine. Not the cold of winter, but the cold of understanding. Someone had bled down here. Someone in fear, or in pain. Max let out a short bark, sharp enough to bounce off the beams. He moved again, circling the room until his paw struck something buried under debris. A metallic click echoed across the cellar. Thea hurried over and knelt beside him. Beneath a pile of broken jars and gravel lay a small reel-to-reel recorder, half charred at one corner as if someone tried to burn it, but never finished the job. Still, tape inside was blackened, brittle, but intact. Oh my goodness, she whispered. Who hid this? She lifted the recorder gently, brushing soot from the metal casing. Max stayed pressed close, nose twitching as if the device still carried the scent of the man who once held it. There was no electricity, but the recorder had a manual crank. Old technology. Old secrets. Thea turned the handle slowly. A crackle broke the silence. The first sound that room had heard in half a century. Another crackle. A hiss. Then a voice, slurred by time, distorted by heat damage, but unmistakably human. "I didn't betray my country." The words were so sudden Thea flinched. Max pressed his shoulder against her leg. "I didn't betray anyone." The voice continued, strained. "I just loved the wrong person, and someone decided that was enough." Thea swallowed hard. Caleb Ray. She knew it before the voice confirmed it, but the next word sealed everything. "My name is Caleb Ray. If my daughter ever hears this, Emma, forgive me. I tried to protect you from all of it." The tape clicked, skipped, then continued in broken fragments. "They came at night. They said I was passing information, lies, all of it. We trusted the wrong friend, someone we thought was family." The rest of the sentence burned out. Thea's pulse hammered. Betrayal. Disappearance. Blood on cellar walls. Someone they trusted. Max nudged her hand, urging her to keep going. She cranked again. More static. More damage. Then a sentence slipped through, barely audible. "If anything happens, follow the creek." The same line written on the note in the tin box. The recording sputtered, then died entirely. No matter how many times she spun the crank, the tape refused to carry another whisper from the dead. Thea sat back on her heels, the recorder resting in her lap. The cellar no longer felt empty. It felt occupied, by fear that hadn't fully left, by a man's last attempt to leave truth behind. Max wandered to the far wall again, nose brushing along the baseboard. He pawed at it once, exposing more wood worn thin by water and time. A gap ran along the bottom, just wide enough to hide something. Thea slid her fingers into the space and felt fabric. Old, stiff, but unmistakably a piece of cloth. She pulled it free. A child's scarf. Blue with faded white stitching. A name stitched inside. Emma. Her chest tightened. The scarf was small. Too small for a full-grown woman. Emma must have dropped it while hiding. Or while being hidden. Max pressed his nose to the scarf, inhaled deeply, then looked toward the ceiling as if trying to pull an invisible trail from the air. He whined softly. That sound wasn't fear. It was recognition. A memory faint but lingering. Something from his earlier life in search and rescue, where every object was a clue, every scent a story. "Are you telling me she made it out?" Thea whispered. Max barked once. Firm, certain. Thea looked at the recorder again. Caleb Ray hadn't sounded hopeless. He'd sounded desperate, determined, like a man fighting to send a message through whatever darkness trapped him. A story began forming in the back of her mind. A family accused, a father tortured, a girl forced to hide, then silence for 50 years. And now an old woman and her dog had reopened the door no one dared touch. Thea stood slowly, her hand steady even as her breath shook. "We're not finished," she told Max. "Not even close." The dog stepped forward first, ready to lead. Outside the cellar, snow continued to fall in slow, quiet sheets. The forest waited, holding its secrets the way cold ground holds bones. But secrets didn't stay buried forever. Some dogs could smell truth even when men tried to erase it. And Max had just caught the scent. The storm returned the next night, rolling over the Sapphire Range like a warning. Wind rattled every loose shingle on the cabin roof. Thea sat at the kitchen table sorting through the items from the cellar, but Max wouldn't settle. He paced from door to window, muscles vibrating under his coat, ears flicking at sounds she couldn't hear. When the first thunder cracked, Max lunged toward the hallway that led to the cellar door. Not the hidden one in the forest, the other one. the one inside the cabin that had been nailed shut since the day she arrived. "Max, what now?" He growled low, pushing his weight against the door as if he'd been waiting for this moment. Thea hesitated. The boards sealing the door looked older than the house itself. Nails bent outward, wood warped. Whatever lay on the other side, someone had been determined to bury it without burning the whole place down. Max barked once, sharp, impatient. "All right, I'm coming." She grabbed the crowbar she'd used to clear debris the first week she bought the place. With the storm shaking the walls, she wedged the metal under the first board and leaned with all her weight. The wood split. Dust scattered. Max pressed closer, eyes fixed on the darkness seeping through the cracks. Another board. Then another. By the fourth, the door shuddered. Max backed up 2 steps, crouched, and with a force she didn't know he had, he threw himself against it. The door burst inward. Cold air rushed out like a held breath finally released. Max disappeared inside. "Max!" she called, her voice swallowed by the space below. She grabbed a flashlight and followed. The staircase creaked under her weight. At the bottom, light revealed a small room carved beneath the cabin. It was not as old as the cellar outside. Not a root cellar, not a storm shelter, a refuge, a child's refuge. Max stood in the middle, staring at a wooden desk pushed against the wall. On it lay a stack of notebooks, the covers faded but intact. A tin box, a small blanket folded with surprising care, drawings pinned to the wall with rusted nails. Thea moved closer, her light trembling. The drawings were simple sketches. A cabin, the forest, a creek winding between pines. But one drawing caught her breath. A girl, 12 or 13, sitting beside a man with gentle eyes and a tired smile. Emma and Caleb Ray. Her hands shook as she opened the first notebook. The handwriting was young, looping, determined. "Day 1, they said we have to hide. Dad said we didn't do anything wrong. Day 3, Mom is coughing again. Dad prays no one finds us. Day 5, I heard voices outside last night. Someone yelled my father's name." Thea swallowed. The next entry was smeared with water damage, but legible. Day 6, they took Dad. He told me not to scream. He said he would come back. Thea flipped forward. Day 8, Mom won't wake up. Day 9, I can't leave. They will see me. I have to wait for Dad. He promised. The room tilted for a moment. She felt the weight of a child's isolation press against the walls. Max nudged her elbow gently, grounding her. She opened another notebook. Older handwriting. More frantic. They think we betrayed the country. They lied. Someone told them things that weren't true. Someone we trusted. Then another line. If anyone ever finds this place, please don't think badly of Dad. Tears stung Thea's eyes. The storm above trembled the ceiling, making dust fall like snow. Max stepped toward the tin box on the desk. He sniffed, then barked once. "Okay," she whispered, lifting the lid. Inside lay a folded letter. Yellowed edges. Unsent. For whoever finds this, I don't know if Dad is alive. I don't know if I will be. But someone helped me. Someone opened the door one night and said I had to run. That my family never betrayed anyone. That I needed to change my name if I wanted to survive. I am leaving with her now. Her name is Margaret Gibbons. She said she will keep me safe. I hope someday the truth comes out. Emma Ray. Thea felt the room blur. Her hands trembled more violently. Margaret Gibbons. There was only one Gibbons family in Lone Birch. She had met them. Years ago. Good people. Quiet people. And Mary Gibbons, the oldest daughter, worked at the post office in town. Mary Gibbons. The name hit Thea like a lantern shattering on stone. She replayed the memory from her first week here. Mary handing her a map of local hiking trails. Mary asking where she lived. Mary freezing for a split second when Thea mentioned the cabin near the creek. Max looked at her, sensing the shift in her breathing. "You're telling me she's not who she says she is," Thea whispered. "Emma lived." Suddenly Max stiffened. His ears snapped toward the staircase. He growled, deep and primal. Someone was outside. Footsteps, soft, careful. Snow crunching under calculated weight. Thea turned off the flashlight. Darkness consumed the room. Max stood between her and the stairs, body rigid, prepared. A shadow moved across the crack under the door. Then a woman's voice, faint through the storm. "Thea, I know you found it." Every hair on Thea's arms rose. The voice was steady, soft, familiar. Mary Gibbons, Emma Ray, the woman who slipped through the cracks of history. The girl who had survived when the rest of her family didn't. Max's growl deepened, not in hostility but in warning. The past had not only returned, it had come to the door, and Emma Ray wanted to know what Thea planned to do with the truth she had just unearthed. Morning light cut through the storm's residue, leaving the mountains wrapped in a thin mist. The world felt quieter, as if waiting. Thea packed the notebooks, the scarf, the tin box, and the photo of young Emma Ray. Max sat beside her, tail still, but eyes bright with purpose. He had led her this far. Now he was leading her to the truth's final doorway. The lone birch-assisted living home sat on the edge of town, an unassuming building framed by tall pines. Thea had called ahead, asking to speak with Mary Gibbons. The nurse on the line had paused for a long moment before agreeing. "Mary doesn't get many visitors," she'd said. When Thea stepped inside, Max stayed close, his presence drawing smiles from the residents drifting through the halls. They reached a small room at the end of a long corridor. The door was slightly open. Inside, a woman sat by the window, hands folded in her lap. Her hair was white, thin, her shoulders narrow, but her posture, even in age, carried a kind of quiet strength. "Mary?" Thea asked softly. The woman turned her head. Her eyes were pale blue, faded at the edges, but extraordinarily alert. When they met Thea's, something flickered inside them. Something old, something remembered. "You're the woman who bought the cabin," Mary said. Her voice was soft, but steady. "I knew you'd come." Thea stepped forward. "I found something that belonged to you." She placed the scarf first. Mary inhaled sharply, her hand flying to her mouth. Her fingers trembled as she lifted the fabric, pressing it to her cheek. "I thought I lost this," she whispered. "He wrapped it around me before the night he left. I was so cold." Max moved gently to her side, resting his head against her knee. Mary reached out, touching the top of his head with the kind of reverence one gives to miracles. Then Thea placed the photograph on the small table. Mary's breath broke. "My father," she said, her voice fracturing. "God, after all these years." Thea hesitated, then put down the tin box and opened it. Inside, the letter Emma had written all those decades ago lay folded and waiting. Mary unfolded it with slow, deliberate care. Her eyes scanned the page. Tears dripped onto the paper. She didn't wipe them away. "He did come back," she said. "They told me he didn't. They told me he was gone, but he came back. He found the cabin. He tried to save me." The room felt suspended in time. All the decades Mary had spent buried in silence were unfurling in front of her, one truth at a time. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Thea asked quietly. Mary closed the letter. "I was 12. I thought if I spoke up, the same people who took my father would come for me again. Margaret told me the safest thing was to disappear. Become Mary. Leave Emma behind." She looked out the window, her voice softer now. "I spent my whole life pretending the mountains didn't exist. Thea placed the recorder on the table. There's more. Your father left a message. A recording. Mary froze. A message? Yes, his last words. For the first time, fear passed across her features, but she nodded. Thea played the tape, the crackle, the hiss, and then Caleb Ray's voice, broken but unmistakably a man protecting the last thing he had left. Mary covered her mouth with both hands. Her entire body shook. Max nudged her again, his presence a grounding weight. When the recording ended, Mary whispered, "He wasn't a traitor." "No," Thea said, "he wasn't." Mary sat there for a long time, staring at the recorder. Then she exhaled a trembling breath. "They called my father a spy. They told the town he passed secrets. People stopped talking to us. They watched us everywhere. When they came for him, it was one of our neighbors who pointed the way. He thought he was doing the right thing." "And?" Thea asked. Mary looked down at her hands, lined with age but steady. "After everything, after running, after changing my name, I still believed the town deserved the truth." 2 days later, Lone Birch held a gathering in front of the courthouse steps. A cold wind swept across the square, rattling the old flagpole. People from across the valley showed up. Old-timers, new families. Even Samuel Griggs arrived, leaning on his cane, eyes heavy with things he had never said. The mayor stood at a podium, reading from a thick folder of declassified files. Documents that proved the Ray family had been innocent, victims of political paranoia, misjudged, forgotten. Mary sat on the front bench, wrapped in her old scarf. Thea and Max stayed beside her. "This town," the mayor said, his voice carrying across the crowd, "owes the Ray family an apology 50 years overdue." He paused. "And today we give them back their name." A plaque was unveiled, in memory of Caleb, Irene, and Emma Ray. Wronged by fear, restored by truth. Mary's shoulders shook as she cried quietly. Max rested his head on her lap again, the same way he had in her room. She stroked him with the tenderness of someone touching a lifeline. The crowd dispersed slowly. Some approached Mary to apologize, others to offer condolences. Some simply bowed their heads, unsure how to speak to a woman who had survived a world they never knew. As the sunlight dipped behind the mountains, Mary turned to Thea. "You gave me back my father," she said. "You gave me back myself." "It wasn't just me," Thea replied. "Max found most of it." Mary smiled down at him. "I know. He reminds me of a dog I knew when I was little, brave, quiet, always knowing things before anyone else did." Max lifted his gaze, as if he recognized something in her too. A bridge between the past and whatever came next. The mountains felt lighter that evening. The weight of old injustice loosened, echoing into the pines where secrets once hid. Thea looked at the plaque again, then at Mary. Healing didn't erase the past, but it allowed the living to breathe again. Winter arrived without the violence of the last storm, settling instead like a soft blanket over the Sapphire Range. The snow fell slower, quieter, as if the mountains themselves had exhaled. Thea stepped out onto her porch, boots sinking into the powder, the cold air crisp but no longer hostile. Max trotted beside her, leaving deep tracks that overlapped her own. It felt different now. The land hadn't changed, but her place in it had. For the first time since she bought the ruined cabin, silence didn't feel like an enemy. Inside, the house smelled of pine logs and cinnamon tea. Thea had spent the morning clearing debris from the hidden room beneath the floorboards, brushing away decades of dust without disturbing the things Emma had once touched. She kept the small desk where it had always been, cleaned the wooden chair until the grain shone, and folded the blue scarf neatly on the shelf. Emma Ray's room wasn't a secret anymore. It was a memorial. Max wandered down the stairs with her as she finished sweeping the last corner. He sniffed gently at the walls, but there was no growling, no stiffening of his spine. The darkness no longer frightened him. "You did good, boy," Thea murmured, running a hand down his back. "You kept pushing until I listened." He leaned against her leg, accepting the praise with the quiet humility only working dogs carried, the kind of pride that didn't need noise to feel real. When they climbed back up into the main cabin, the fire crackled in the stone hearth. Max circled twice on the rug and collapsed onto it, stretching out with a heavy sigh. He lay there with one ear flicking, watching the flames instead of the cellar door. For the first time since their first night here, he didn't glance towards the floorboards. Thea sat in her rocking chair, a wool blanket over her knees. The storm had taken something out of her. Fear, maybe, or the dread of the unknown. Her hands no longer trembled when she looked toward the hallway. Her thoughts no longer circled the same lonely questions. She had proof now. Proof that the cabin's ghosts weren't shadows, but stories. Stories of people who loved, who ran, who hoped, who suffered. People who were wronged. People who deserved to be remembered. She looked at the photograph of Caleb and Emma resting on the mantel. Beneath it sat the recorder, silent now, as if its purpose had been fulfilled. "You can rest too," she whispered. The wind outside shifted, brushing against the cabin walls in a softer rhythm, not the harsh fists of a blizzard, more like fingertips, a kind of gentle presence. Maybe memory, she thought, or maybe closure. In the days that followed, Thea found herself settling into routines that felt less like survival and more like life. She went to town twice a week. She brought Mary Gibbons fresh muffins from the bakery and listened to stories from a girl who grew up in hiding and grew old in silence. Mary was healing too, in her own slow way. Sometimes Mary would ask, "Does the cabin still feel heavy?" And Thea would answer, "Not anymore." Sometimes Mary asked to see Max. The dog would sit beside her wheelchair with a level of calm reserved only for those he recognized as carrying old wounds. He rested his head on her thigh, and she stroked him as if he were a bridge back to a life lost and rediscovered. Back at the cabin, Thea cooked more. She opened curtains she once left closed. She read books by the fire without checking every sound outside. Her world no longer echoed with that hollow kind of solitude that had followed her since her husband died. Max changed too. He slept deeper, without jerking awake at every creak. He took longer walks with her along the creek, nose low to the fresh snow. Sometimes he would stop and look back at her with a tail wag so gentle it felt like gratitude. One evening, Thea stood by the edge of the forest as the light thinned behind the ridge. The creek beside her was half frozen, water sliding beneath a glassy skin of ice. She breathed in the cold and felt it pass through her without catching on anything sharp inside. The mountains still carried the weight of the past. There would always be echoes of the Ray family in these woods. But now those echoes felt like part of the land's story, not a warning. It was the kind of quiet that didn't accuse or threaten. The kind of quiet that allowed a person to rebuild. That night, Thea curled up in her chair with a book. Max stretched beside the fireplace, paws twitching in an easy sleep. The storm season had begun again, but the cabin was warm, alive, no longer a monument to fear. Before she closed her eyes, Thea whispered into the room, "We're going to be just fine." Max lifted his head briefly, as if agreeing, then relaxed again, the firelight glowing across his fur. Outside, the snow kept falling, but this winter it felt less like a blanket of silence and more like a clean page. A beginning instead of an ending. The knock at the door came just after sunrise. Thea had been slicing apples for a pie, the smell of cinnamon already warming the small kitchen. Max lifted his head first, ears pointed toward the porch, posture alert but calm. Not danger, just someone unfamiliar. When Thea opened the door, a young woman stood there, cheeks flushed from the morning cold, a notebook tucked under her arm. A camera hung from her neck, still fogged at the edges. "Mrs. Morrison, my name's Clara Reeves. I'm a historical reporter working with the Montana Heritage Documentation Project. I was hoping to talk to you about the Ray family and the discovery you made." Thea hesitated for only a breath. Those days of shutting people out had ended months ago. She stepped aside. "Come in, and just call me Thea." Clara entered, stopping short when Max approached. She smiled immediately. "So, this is the famous dog." Max stood tall, tail waving once, the way he greeted people he trusted after a single glance. Clara crouched slightly, offering her hand. Max sniffed, then nudged her fingers with his nose. "He really is everything they said," she murmured. Thea brewed tea while Clara set her notebook on the table, flipping to a page full of scribbles. "I've spoken to the mayor, some of the older residents, even Mary Gibbons, but everyone told me the same thing. I can't write the real story without talking to you." Thea sat down across from her. Max lay between them, his head resting on his paws, but his gaze attentive. "Where should I start?" Thea asked. Clara clicked her pen. "What made you buy this cabin in the first place?" Thea smiled faintly. "I thought I was running away from the world. Turns out the world had been waiting for me." She told Clara everything. Not dramatized, not softened. The late-night storms. Max's growl at the sealed cellar door, the tin box, the scarf, the hidden room with the notebooks that broke her heart one page at a time. Mary's letter. Caleb Ray's recording. Clara wrote furiously, her hand cramping as she filled page after page. "And Max?" she asked finally. Thea looked down at him. "He knew long before I did. Every step of the trail he led. I don't think I would have found anything without him." Clara leaned back. "The whole region is talking about him. People want him on the state historical website. Lone Birch is calling him the dog who dug up the truth." Max blinked slowly, as if the importance of it all didn't concern him. He had done his job. The world could decide what to do with it now. Clara glanced around the cabin. "What will you do with this place?" Thea hesitated. The question had followed her for weeks. Every time she dusted the shelves in the hidden room or replaced a cracked board in the hallway, she felt something growing inside her. A weight, but a good one. Something like responsibility. She stood and walked to the window. Snow was melting on the branches outside, dripping in slow, rhythmic beats. The land looked peaceful. "This cabin held a terrible story," Thea said, still watching the trees. "But it also held courage, and hope, and love between a father and daughter." Clara waited. "I'm going to preserve it," Thea said finally. "Not as a tourist spot, as a place of remembrance, a place where people can come to understand what fear can destroy and what truth can restore." Clara smiled widely. "Do you have a name for it?" Thea nodded. "Little Ray Heritage. Cabin." Max rose and pressed his head against her hand, as if in approval. The following month, Lone Birch helped rebuild the porch, clear the walkways, and repaint the sign that now hung beside the front steps, Little Ray Heritage Cabin, Estimo 2024. Teachers brought classes to visit. Travelers wandered in to read the journals and listen to Caleb Ray's last recorded words. Volunteers offered to help archive documents. Old-timers shared stories they once buried deep inside their own guilt. And through all of it, Max became the cabin's silent guardian. He greeted children gently, nudging their hands with a kind patience. He sat beside veterans who visited, sensing the fractures in their breathing before they spoke. He lay near the fireplace whenever Mary came, resting his chin on her knee while she looked at the picture of the girl she once was. People said he had a gift, that he understood the weight of unspoken things, that he could sense what people carried when they walked through the cabin doors. Thea didn't argue. Max had always known what the mountain tried to hide. One evening, Clara returned with a printed draft of her article. She left 2 copies, one for Thea, one for Mary. The headline read, "The Ray Family, Truth Unearthed by a Woman, a Dog, and the Mountain That Remembered." When Thea finished reading, she found Max waiting at the door, tail thumping softly. "You ready to go out?" she asked. They stepped onto the porch. The sky glowed with the kind of lavender light that only appeared in late winter. A quiet evening. No ghosts left to confront. No secrets clawing through the floorboards. Just the cabin, the mountains, and the dog who had rebuilt the bridge between them. Legacy wasn't always made of monuments or books. Sometimes it was a woman who refused to turn away. Sometimes it was a story once buried in ice. And sometimes it was a dog who dug up the truth with nothing more than instinct, courage, and a heart that understood loss better than most people ever could. The day of the reopening arrived with a sky so clear it looked washed in silver. Snow clung to the pines in soft, glittering layers, and the valley seemed to hold its breath as people gathered outside Little Ray Heritage Cabin. The sign above the porch stood newly polished, the wood warm under the winter sun. Thea stood beside it, bundled in her green wool coat. Max sat at her side, slower these days, but steady as ever. Lone Birch hadn't seen a crowd like this in years. Students from Missoula State, local families, reporters. Even Mary Gibbons, wrapped in her blue scarf, arrived in a wheelchair pushed by a nurse. When she caught Thea's eye, she smiled with a softness that reached all the way back to the girl she once had been. Camera crews framed the cabin, adjusting angles to catch both the structure and the mountains rising behind it. A young reporter approached Thea, microphone in hand, her breath turning to vapor in the cold air. "Mrs. Morrison," she said, her voice bright with anticipation. "One question before we begin the ceremony. Everyone's been talking about Max, about what he uncovered here. I guess what people really want to know is—" She angled the microphone slightly upward. "Why did you keep Max with you through everything?" Thea looked down at the old dog beside her. His muzzle had turned almost entirely white. His chest rose slowly, calmly, as if he understood every word being spoken. She rested her hand gently on his head. "He didn't save my cabin," she said, her voice steady but thick with feeling. "He saved the woman I thought I'd lost." The crowd fell silent. Even the wind paused long enough to let the words settle. Max blinked once and pressed his head against her palm, the same way he had done the night she broke free from her grief and let life in again. Thea turned toward the camera, now pointed directly at her. "What's your story with a loyal pet?" The valley exhaled. A single gust of wind drifted through the clearing, stirring the snow in soft spirals. It felt like a quiet blessing, something light and unseen passing through, an echo from the Ray family, carried by the mountains that had guarded their story for 5 long decades. People clapped. Children came forward to pet Max. Mary watched with tearful pride, seeing the dog who had reopened her past and led her back into the world. The ceremony continued with speeches, dedications, and moments of silence for those who never received justice in their own time. When it ended, and the crowd began to drift away, Thea remained on the porch. Max lay at her feet, soaking in the afternoon warmth. She looked out at the line of pines stretching endlessly towards the horizon and felt something settle inside her, peace, or perhaps a sense of purpose fully earned. The cabin was no longer a place of fear. It belonged to the living now. and the dead could rest. Max lifted his head as if hearing something distant, something only he could sense. His tail tapped the porch twice. Thea laughed softly. "You still hear what the mountain says before I do," she whispered. They stayed there until the sun began to slide behind the ridge, painting the valley in soft gold. Before going inside, Thea turned back to the camera crew, packing up near the gate, knowing the footage would reach far beyond Lone Birch. It would reach people who needed to hear it, who needed stories of hope, courage, and the quiet heroism of dogs who refused to let the truth stay buried. And so this story ends, and another begins. If you're watching, if you've ever had a dog who stood by you through your dark winters and your unexpected storms, then this is your moment too. Support the channel. Share Max's story. Share yours. Because somewhere out there, another loyal heart is waiting to lead someone home. German Shepherds don't just guard lives. Sometimes they guard the truth.